Welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, the Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday night, April the 5th, 2023, Jimmy. And if it is Wednesday night,
It's definitely Black Men Speak. So let's take care of some of our business first. So let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel so you're notified whenever we upload new shows. And then share the word. If you're here watching the show, invite a friend to come along. And please, we have a chat line and we have a phone line for you to participate. So you can submit questions, your comments. You can call us and join the conversation. So you don't have to sit on the sideline and just listen to myself and Tommy speak. And then one last thing, Tommy, I did sort of search engine optimization search today, and we're definitely moving up in the ranks, man. If you go out to Google and do a search on Black Men Speak, years ago when we started this channel, we didn't even appear on the page anywhere. And now we're listed as number 7. There are 2 websites, there are 2 podcasts, and then there's 2 Facebook pages listed before us with the same name. And then we're listed at number 7. But then if you do a search within YouTube for Black Men Speak, we are actually number 1. So we've come a very long way. After our issues with being shadow banned and our channel dropped a number of times for complaints filed against us. But we have survived time. We've persevered, and we're still here. So big shout out to everyone who supports us, who's sticking with us, and who's helping us get to where we are today.
yes, absolutely, Jimmy. We want to thank our supporters, our friends, those who have been keeping the faith.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Ed Gray, the Commish radio show. He is on our chat line now, so we want to thank him for joining us. And we actually have, Jimmy, as we start tonight's show, a very special guest. By the way, he was introduced to Black Men Speak by the commish, Ed Grace. We want to thank him for being on our show and supporting us and connecting us to our special guest, who we will introduce in just a second, Jimmy. But we do want to have a brief news briefs just before we start the meat and potatoes of our show tonight, Jimmy.
Yes.
And for those of you who are out there and are sports fans, we want to, of course, congratulate the women's 2023 National Basketball Champions, LSU Tigers.
The Lady Tigers, yes. I did watch the game, Tom. I normally don't watch that much uh, ladies basketball, but I watched this one. A good game. I enjoyed it. Some said it was boring, but I thought it was pretty fascinating to watch. So I was thoroughly impressed. The lady Tigers brought their A game, man. And they were very consistent throughout the tournament. So I think in this particular case, the best ladies team won.
Yeah, and it was interesting, Jimmy, because I did not get a chance to watch the game, but I talked to a couple of people who did. Obviously, there was some drama. I don't know that there was drama in the game, but after the game, there were a lot of people who were creating a bunch of hullabaloo, primarily in the mass media about something that the one of the star players of the team, because obviously the LSU Lady Tigers team showed up, but Miss Reese did something that I guess upset some folks in the media, and it was kind of interesting because she was directed it towards the young lady with Iowa, Caitlin. I don't recall her last name. It looks like some folks had some issue with it. I don't really know what the big.
I didn't have an issue with it, Tom. I mean, that's just the competitive nature of sports. And when you're playing and you kind of, let me see, find the best way to say this. Person of Miss Reese's position on her team, the importance of her team, you believe that you're entitled to a certain level of respect from the other team. And so when someone disrespects you or you feel like you've been disrespected in a way, you're going to find a way, Tom, to either take it and turn the other cheek, or you're going to express yourself and retaliate. So this happens in sports. When you're being competitive, there's a lot of trash talking back and forth sometimes. It's just the nature of it. um, and so you don't normally see it that much in sports, but it is part of the sports scene. So
It is.
I would suggest for people not to worry about it because it was LeBron and Steph Curry going at it on the basketball court, and then they shake hands after the game or give each other a funny look after the game. No one would think anything of it. They would just say, "Okay, that's just competitive nature of sports." So I would say, treat this the same way.
Yeah, Jimmy. And so I guess what I found interesting about it after doing a little research is that, they seem to be attacking this sister for doing the hand gesture to the face. And I guess some folks were somewhat insulted by it and started insulting the young lady. And the reality of it is that the other young lady
Have
and
done
I
the same thing
had done the same thing
in
to
other
someone
games.
else.
Yes,
Exactly. And so I was like, you got to have one set of rules for everybody. I don't know what the problem was, but there were some gender equity issues that people brought up, some racial issues that people brought up. I mean, it was embraced when it was the young lady from Iowa who did it, but when it was the young lady from LSU, it was a problem. So, it's basketball. It's all fair in love and war. And there wasn't any fighting. There wasn't any bottle throwing, anything like that, Jimmy. So people just need
right, Tom. It's taking something that you've done. Let's say it was you and I, and
yes,
you have something that you've done, some hand gesture, something that you've done a couple of times, and then I decide I want to get back at you, and then I take what you've done and direct it back at you to show you how I feel. I mean, that's basically what this was.
yep,
Because Miss Reese didn't have a history of doing this in previous games.
correct.
So, like I said, this is just sportsmanship, a little competitive nature. Two athletes going back and forth, and I certainly think too much was made of it. Um, and maybe there is a racial component to it, but yeah, way too much was made of this, and it was certainly blown out of proportion.
All that being said, congratulations to the Lady Tigers.
Congratulations to them. Yes.
Some of the best players on the teams are coming back, so we expect at least as good, if not even a better, ending next year to women's basketball. And Jimmy, at the end of the day, women's basketball has been great for some years now, and now it is mainstream. And quite frankly, it got more play than the men's championship game. By the way, congratulations to UConn, who beat San Diego State this past Monday as well.
Yeah, Tom. I tried to watch the men's championship game, and I was a little disappointed. It was a very boring game, uneventful. I wish it was more competitive and closer. So yes, the women's championship was much more entertaining than the men's championship.
Yeah, yeah. So congratulations to UConn. Congratulations to the Lady Tigers. You got bragging rights for the next year. And then, of course, Jimmy, also we have to congratulate Brandon Johnson, who just defeated his opponent, Paul Vallis, to become the mayor-elect of
Yes.
the city of Chicago. Obviously, there was a lot being said over the last month or so because, of course, Lori Lightfoot was the first mayor in recent history to not get past the first term of office. And so it was a very interesting narrative going on. But congratulations to Brandon Johnson to becoming mayor-elect, I believe the third largest city in the country.
Yes, congratulations, and let's hope that this is not a trend of one-term mayors. So I wish the brother luck and success in his role, and I think the people of Chicago, Tom, deserve a break. Um, I think both candidates made crime an issue in education, so,
Mm.
so let's hope he lives up to that, and let's see what happens.
All right, Jimmy.
Oh, let's give a big shout out to Miss Tanya Hall,
Yeah,
who's on the chat
yeah.
line.
Miss
A Brown, Audrey
yeah,
Booker.
yeah, Amanda
One
Brown
of,
and Audrey Booker as well. I want to thank them all for
yes,
supporting us this evening. And of course, we always have our good friend, Mr. Asar Al Kabilan, who supports us typically on the indirect side. And then I have to give a shout out to my good brother, Frederick V. Roberts, Esquire. He mentioned that he was on the show, but for whatever reason, he did not show up on the chat line. So I have to give him a shout out. He may be on the chat line. We might not be able to see him, but he told me he was there supporting us. We want to make sure we give him a shout out as well.
and guys, our phone number is listed. The phone line is open because nobody's called in. Please do not wait to the end of the show, which we normally get for a lot of questions. So if you have questions for ourselves or our guests, or just make a comment, please give us a call.
So without further ado, Jimmy, I'd like to introduce our special guest, returning guest, Professor Clarence E. Glover Jr. And for those of you who have not watched some of our prior shows and who may not be familiar, especially if you're not from the DFW area, Professor Glover is a 40-year veteran of the civil rights movement, a protege of Miss Coretta Scott King, Miss Rosa Parks, Dr. Ralph David Abernathy, Dr. C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Lewis, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and Dr. Bernard Lafayette. Professor Glover took up the mantle of the Civil Rights Movement Phase 2. At age 66, he has been an instrumental in achieving what Dr. Martin Luther King called institutionalizing nonviolent social change. In the 80s, he established the Department of Intercultural Relations and Minority Student Affairs at Southern Methodist University, and was an adjunct professor of African American Studies teaching the popular course Black and White. He also discovered Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1966 SMU speech, which the university recently placed a Texas historical marker at the McFarland Auditorium where Dr. King spoke. Professor Glover in the 90s was also the founder of the Department of Intercultural Education for the Dallas Independent School District, where he served as special assistant to the general superintendent. While at SMU and DISD, he developed diversity harassment policies, which were among the first in the nation. During the 1980s, Professor Glover served as chairman of the Dallas NAACP Police Community Relations Committee that guided the Dallas Police Department in the nation's first Police Reforms Act by revising the deadly force policy from property over life to life over property, eliminating the deadly chokehold, and developing multicultural education training for the Dallas Police Academy folks. And there's a heck of a lot more for us to talk about, but we're going to just go ahead and bring them in and start.
Yes, that's the Reader Digest version.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome my good brother, Professor Clarence Glover. How you doing today, sir?
Wonderful. Greetings. I'm certainly delighted to be with both of y'all this evening, brothers.
Good deal. Now, we want to thank you for making time on your very busy schedule to come back and talk with us. So Jim and I were having a conversation last week, and we thought it more than appropriate to commit this show and to take some time to talk about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his life, his work, his legacy. And I don't think that there's any person that we could have invited who I think could give such a strong representation of what he has done, the impact that he's made, and why we must remember not just the things that mainstream America is advocating for, but the things that our community must know about this great patriot in American history.
Well, certainly, as we pause on the 4th of April to remember the assassination of Dr. King on yesterday, it is very appropriate to be able to continue that reflection on today. I, however, would suggest that we expand not only the vision of Dr. King as an individual, but also to understand the movement. When I was at SMU in 1981, the lecture I gave in Perkins Chapel was entitled The Man, the Dream, and the People. And so while we certainly understand the man, there's much to know about him. Michael King, as he was born, Michael King, not Martin Luther King. And later on, his name became Martin Luther King, his father and others. But his profound sense of intellect, his middle class status in Atlanta, Georgia, which allowed him to do certain things, as well as the rejection of him by the middle class, because he did step out of the middle class and come into the masses of people. So there's much to be said about Dr. King, who I look forward to us going deeper. However, my desire now, at the age I am, is to try to share what I have been blessed and privileged to be a part of, and that is many of the men and women who worked with Dr. King, his wife, certainly, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and this is just a shot of Mrs. King and I during the 1986 taping of In Remembrance of Martin, the first King holiday in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
And prior to that, I had worked with Mrs. King and Dr. Lafayette at the King Center and training students on nonviolent direct action. And then we have here Mrs. Rosie Parks and I and Washington, D.C., where we testified before Congress regarding police brutality in the Black community. And she was coming out of Detroit. I was coming out of Dallas. And so my life is at a young age has been wrapped up in the movement. And that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. And as you called me on yesterday, we started with the concept of movement calling for resurrecting the movement. I am a man. And this is just a postcard. It's very, I am a man, it says. And for those who don't know, that Dr. King went to Memphis to support the garbage workers.
Right,
And
striking workers.
striking two of the men who have been killed, and in terms of the union and being the recognizing the union and pushing for equity, economic equity and justice. So in memory of that, we kicked off yesterday the I Am a Man movement with the intent of us beginning to come together and talk about some of the relevant things that we can do in our day and time using the philosophies and strategies of Dr. King, Dr. C.T. Vivian, Dr. Lafayette, and many other men, along with men of today. I think our generation, I'm 66, what can I glean from my father, who was also Dr. King's age? I was 10 years old. Martin Luther King III and I, who've traveled together and speak, we're the same age. So I represent that second arm of a child. My father was a civil rights activist in Louisiana. So I was at that age and remembering, plus my father was from Memphis. So I have been to the Lorraine Motel before it became a museum. I've sat on the bed where Dr. King slept the last time before he was passed away. Before he was assassinated, should I say. So I have fond memories. I mean, not fond memories, but I say delicate, deep memories of that experience. And then Dr. Lafayette, who was with Dr. King that morning, was given the task of institutionalizing nonviolence. And that means that to take the movement and put principles, philosophies into institutions. Dr. Lafayette left Memphis, and Dr. King was later on assassinated that evening. He was working on the Poor People's Campaign in Washington. And so Dr. Lafayette has been my mentor. I even told him about the program tonight. If he's tuned in, and certainly that generation is passing down to us that information and that we need to do. So I Am a Man is a part of us as men beginning to come together. And I was at the King statue yesterday at 6:04 where we rang the bell 7 times in his memory at the King Center in Dallas. And we're going to begin meeting there at the King Center, I Am a Man, and begin to work with the men, not only ourselves, but men in the community, but bringing it all together spiritually, mentally, and educationally and economically.
So, Professor, please share with us some of the principles of I Am a Man.
I'm a Man was based around during that time. There was respect, dignity, and labor. It's very important to understand that we're talking about being seen as a human being. And so when I tell men, European or white men my age, that when you look at me, you must recognize that your father, my father, would never have had this opportunity to speak as directly to each other as you and I are speaking today. My father and your father. And they look at me, and it's almost like a moment, an epiphany. I say, yes, we're the first generation of Black and white men in America who can look at each other eye to eye with respect. For you to respect who I am. For me to be able to have the dignity as a man to speak to you and you speak to me. And then ultimately to be able to have the opportunity to acquire employment, to take care of our families, to own land. And that's very, very critical, particularly in Texas, because Texas is all about the land. Stephen F. Austin came here and said, we can rise out of poverty by raising cotton, but we cannot do it without the slave. And fundamentally, what that means is that we cannot do it without the Black man. Now, so that it doesn't sound sexist. The land in Texas is extremely hard. It's called the black clay soil. So you needed strong black men to be able to break the soil in this state to grow the cotton necessary during those early years, all the way up until the 1960s, the earliest. So that you had to have these millibusters and the muse, black men, black muse, I like to suggest. And so this strength, this element of manhood was essential to the evolution of the cotton industry in Dallas. But there were no returns on the labor. And that became the foundation that created the inequities both in Texas throughout the South. Texas was only an antebellum South for a very short period, about 50 years. We had gone from South Carolina to Georgia, Mississippi. So by the time we arrived in Texas, Texas was the last southern state. Dallas became the last great southern city. And so consequently, it became a stronghold for the Confederacy. As we all know, many said that Dr. King did not come here to launch a movement, but yes, he came to speak, and he did come to SMU in 1966. While there, I was able to recover the speech that he gave there at SMU, and you can go to Dr. Martin Luther King SMU now and pull it up. And I encourage you to listen to his entire 58-minute speech at SMU entitled "The Future of Integration." And I also like to encourage the audience to listen to another speech of Dr. King that I think is critical long before that 56 speech, but go back to 56 when he started and listen to his speech about Ghana and the birth of a new nation.
Yes.
Because it is out of that inspiration of Kwame Nkrumah that he received his spirit to say we as Africans in the continent had broken off from the British rule now have this desire and energy to come and become free people. So we see this Pan-African connection between Kwame Nkrumah and Martin Luther King. And we should use that as inspiration. And today, Ghana is inviting us back. My family, the Glover family, I've been to the house of Glovers in Ghana there in 2004. And we've established a church, a congregation in Bonware, Ghana, in the Kente village. So making international connections is critical as well.
No, that's great feedback, and I appreciate that. And I did listen to that speech; it was very inspiring. I find it interesting when we think about the narrative that mass media projects onto Dr. King, and they take certain segments of his speeches, of his many speeches, and it's a very small part of really the total story and the total messaging around Dr. King said. I actually took the time to listen to the speech in Memphis, just right before, of course, we lost him. And, of course, most folks are familiar with, the segment that talks about, I've gone to the mountaintop. I may not get with you there, but there was a whole another segment of that speech that a lot of folks miss out on in terms of where Dr. King said that we must go if we're going to achieve equity. And it also talks about the origin, or not maybe the origin, but talking about his economic agenda for the Black community as well.
Well, certainly. And you said something earlier, and I want to just piggyback on what you just said. We often use the phrase, particularly as African Americans, what the media has not done or what others have not done. But I do want to commend you all tonight, because I submit to you that it's what we must do, not what they must do, or what they have done.
Correct.
Because both the enslavement of a people and all of the things that have done, those are intentional things in any sort of world conflict or whatever. What I'm deeply concerned about is how we go about educating ourselves and our people and encouraging them to do the hard work, if you will. I heard you talking about basketball earlier and football. I mean, basketball and everything. And I'm laughing because I've never been a sports fanatic. I ran track, but oftentimes while others were outside playing basketball or the game, I was reading a book. And so I'm all about a revolution now of knowledge. Both Dr. King as Elik El Shabazz, and I say that specifically because there was no Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a transitional name, and we should stop using Malcolm X. He was Malik El Shabazz after he had come back from the Hajj. Malcolm X is a marketing term that has been used by the system to make a lot of money with caps and shirts. So there's no historical Malcolm X. I mean, once he had transitioned into Malik El Shabazz and was moving toward a lot higher level of consciousness. Plus, while in prison, he took the dictionary and read it through and through.
Yep.
And so I challenge young brothers to read and understand the dictionary and replace take the dictionary over against the 48 Laws of Power, which is a book now that they are studying on Machiavellian warfare, written by Robert Greene, who is a European American that is beginning to corrupt this concept of power within our community and the conflicts against young African American males in terms of power. And that's what we.
Can you explain that?
The 48 Laws of Power, the conflict
in terms of the corruption of it against our community.
Between our community, particularly gangster rap and music. And we begin to see that. And so there's an eternal battle going on within our community that many people don't understand, because you have to stay connected with the books. And I'm around the young men often in the barbershops, in the communities, and they read it. And it's centered around Machiavellian warfare and power. But these are the types of things that I Am a Man we will be doing. We're going to be exploring what it is that we, in my generation, who have done or not done, what it is that we can glean from our past generation, what it is that the generations after us are doing. How can we begin to understand the context of music? Just as Cornel West and I were together at SMU yesterday, Dr. West, and he loves jazz and blues as much as I do. And so as I tell young people, the system has made hip hop almost as if it is the music, the dominant music form of African Americans, when it is only a genre of music. That's
Correct.
simply it. And the mother and father of hip hop is doo-wop and bebop.
Correct.
So we must understand this, and a new genre may come on down the road, but they've commercialized it. It is infused with the 40 Laws of Power. It is contextually creating tension within our community, and self-destruction is evolving. They've taken fundamentally, this is a native instrument, and then I'm a Man project. We'll be studying more about the djembe and the power of the drum. But when you take this is a small drum, but when you take this beat and you see all the music rhythms that have the beat, these beats on a very larger drum, you're going to have war beats, the different rhythm patterns and different frequencies of patterns that create a reaction, particularly among our young men and among men in general. And we have to understand that, and those things we'll be exploring so we can understand how we can reduce this self-destructive element in our community.
You know, you bring up some very interesting points about the use, or what we might call the manipulation of what we call rap music, and how it is being used against our community in a destructive way. I mean, I think I forgot how long ago they said that it is now the #1 musical genre in terms of revenue generation globally, even more so than rock and roll in some other areas. But when we look at the content and how it is directed, it does seem to be problematic for our community, even though, for what it's worth, folks from other communities actually spend more money collectively than we do on it.
Most definitely. It has always been that way since we've arrived here, when the drum was outlawed in America, and we began to improvise other instruments. Even when we brought the banjo here, which comes out of the kora, but yet we improvised in Congo Square in New Orleans, and we began to create these unique sounds. But we've always had the beat, and that's why when I was in seminary, they asked me to define God, and as a minister, I said in the beginning was the beat. And the beat was the rhythm of God, and the rhythm of God became the harmony of humanity. And where there's harmony, there is peace. Now, one of my former students, Brother Young, Joseph Young, he went on with the sounds of blackness and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And you can tune in tonight. Just Google it. Sounds of Blackness. We Are the Drum. But he got that rap from me. In the beginning was the beat, and the beat was the rhythm of God, and the rhythm of God became the harmony of people. Now, rap is nothing new to African people. We are always rapping. We always are telling stories through the rhythm and rhyme process. We learn our ABCs, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, rhythm and rhyme. So it's not new. But what is happening in a more recent time, it is an instrument. It is used as an instrument of destruction in terms of the infusing the negative part. There is a saying that the greatest weapon that the oppressor has in his hands is the mind of the oppressed. So you are able to penetrate the mind, and so that's why my AKA is Professor Freedom. I take the chains off your brain so your mind can work. I take the chains off your brain so your mind can work. So I work with young people all the time because we have to reverse those things that have been imposed upon us and be able to, just like we look at MacGyver or look at the shows on TV where these people, we look at Mission Impossible, when we had the African American man who's the scientist, at the last minute. So we have things that we have to do, and the music is one of them. How we can diffuse the music. But now we're going into this privatization of music where no longer does the mother or the father listen to the music in the house as we used to do. But now the child listens to it by him or herself.
Correct.
You don't know what they're listening to. They're being programmed with beats and sounds and frequencies and words. They get off, then they begin to attack each other. They're fighting each other over the phone. They're going to battles and places. So we, as adults, must begin to identify what it means. As a senior citizen, now I'm 60, I will be 67, April 19th. And that's another important date because April 19th is the day on which we have Columbine, Waco, Ruby Ridge, all those days of national terrorism in our country. So for me, that has been a very important time. Just like April 4th is an important time for me. And that's the day they did an article on me in Time magazine entitled Strange Reverse Racism, a Strange Doctrine of Black Supremacy Enters College and University Classrooms. It was done on April 4th, and it affected my life, and so I'm talking about it now. But that's what happens. You program people by using dates, numbers, time, sound, and it impacts people's lives in certain ways. So that's why your work is so critical.
Let me ask you this, and we won't get too far off the tracks on this, but when you talked about a little bit earlier about how the content, the lyrics of a lot of the music in the popular genre called rap, and there's been a lot of conversation about this on panel discussions, podcasts, etc., about how it is being used to basically program our young people. And we're talking not just to parents, but to those young folks and even older folks who listen to it, because it is targeted towards our community. When we look at the sheer content when it comes to the elimination and destruction of Black men fighting each other, if we look at the miscegenation and the exploitation and sexualization of Black women in the music and the content, how do we as a community do better about reverse engineering and eliminating the trauma and the destructive nature of this content?
Well, first of all, we have to go back again. I say rap is not new. Rap, National Geographic, I have several copies. They did a great story years ago about taking rap from Africa and all the way bringing it to America. And what we do see is that during segregation, during the times of my life and my father's life, when we all lived together and we all heard the music, we celebrate. I love music. I love music. I love dancing. I love bebop. I swing. I do all of that. I love jazz. And we were together. We were a community, Ubuntu, Harambe, all together.
Correct.
But when we began to see the technology, there's another book called Megatrends and Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. I read these many years ago, and it's talking about what technology would do to humanity as a whole. So when technology impacts humanity as a whole, there's an old saying that when white folks catch a cold, Black folks got pneumonia.
Yep.
So when the technology hits this whole society, it has a much more profound negative impact on us. So when we look at what happened, particularly with my good friend Dr. West,
yes,
talked about even back then in his book that I had him sign yesterday, Race Matters. But we're talking about the two sets of African Americans. You have to remember that you had the middle class African American living with the blue collar and no collar African American. What I mean by that, white collar meaning doctors, lawyers, teachers, blue
Right.
collar meaning plumbers, cooks, etc., and no collar meaning individuals who didn't necessarily have jobs or whatever. But we lived together. I live together with them on the Cooper Road, but that's part of my community. I like staying in South Dallas, but many middle class African Americans left, like in New York. And when that happened, you left behind the African Americans who were blue collar and no collar. And in the midst of that experience, what we call today modern rap had its more, particularly the spinning of the records, scratching, if you will, then, signifying back then. You see, all of these things began to happen. And so we see this music right at the evolution of technology. That's why scratching and other things have now become studies at Graduate School of Music. And so just like Dr. King, when the television came into scope, and they used it as a tool to magnify the civil rights movement. And then we saw these young men and women who did what African people have always done in America. We create the popular culture, be it minstrel shows that white people pattern after us, playing the banjo, blackface, be it blues and jazz with the records that had what is called the race covers. So we have always guided popular culture in America, dictated by the African American experience. But what happened is that we separated the black middle class and the lower class. This is what we have to really deal with this is family talk now. But what happens is that the black middle class children are still impacted by the rap and the music that comes out of the no collar, the ones who were left in the inner city in New York, the Bronx, Detroit, Chicago, Compton, California, all those type of things. You know? So when I saw the movie, Boys in the Hood,
yeah.
which were not boys, these were young men.
Correct.
But they used the word boys in the hood. And you saw this competition between a young man going to college and the young man and you saw this whole play with the young man, Ice and all.
Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut.
Yeah, all this. So that was a play on this separation, if you will. So we have to have this conversation as you and I are having tonight, not about necessarily them, yes, them, but more importantly about us. So I am a man begins to say, what have we done about manhood? How has manhood been impacted? But how are we reconstructing manhood? You see, we have that responsibility. When I'm planting seed right now, I'm planting purple hull peas right now, things to grow. What are men doing to grow food? We hear about food deserts, but what are we doing to grow food? How are we engaging in that process? And where's the land? Because when you begin to do those things that are essential, i.e. food, very essential.
Yes.
You are able then to have the time. Because I take some men out there with me and some boys out to the field with me, that's less time to have what? The privatization of sound and the ability and opportunity to speak into each other.
I would agree. So to simplify this, when we talk about that element of the genre of rap music that is destructive, that is exploitive, that is marketed through radio, through television, that we see in mainstream America, what is the fight? Because there's a segmentation. I mean, I grew up on R&B, and then the early days of rap. That was very different than a lot of what is marketed now and propagated now to our communities, and in particular through our young people, that is creating the psychology for the next generation. So then when we talk about what is the fight and what is the struggle that we have to do to correct this, because it is specifically being targeted at our communities, our young men and our young women.
Well, again, I hear a word, I hear it is specifically being targeted. And I hear this great deal. We live in a world, since we talk about men are warriors, fundamentally.
Correct.
I use the phrase, women bear nations, men build nations. Let me say it again. Women what? Bear nations. A man does not have a child.
Correct.
But men build nations. Once a child is in the womb, then man should be out cutting trees, making a house, building sewage, infrastructure, preparing food, clothing, shelter, and protection. Would you agree?
Agree.
So when men are doing those things, then we're doing what we are responsible in doing. The conflicts between nations ultimately is a conflict between men. When men then engage in warfare, you have the victor. And there's a saying that you've all heard that to the victor goes to what?
Spoils.
Goes to spoils. So please hear what I'm about to say, because I've always loved history. I am a historian, theologian. So when I'm looking at these shows as a child about the wars between the different kingdoms, etc., there's always someone who's going to be the victor, somebody's going to be the spoils, and usually the spoils are the women, the children, etc. Am I right?
Right.
Correct. So what happens here is that, again, as we step back and look at our manhood, and as we ask, what are we doing as men, i.e. your program, Black Men Speak, and we began to qualify and quantify our actions. You see. So that's why, for me, acting and doing something is essential, so that we don't engage in perpetual rhetoric. And that's what we do a lot of. I'm 67 years old, so I've been a part of a lot of shows. I've done a lot of speaking. But the thing that I challenge men to do today is something. What are you planting? They look at me, what are you planting? Where's your land? A man without land is not much. A man in this land goes hand in hand, and a man without land is not much of a man. So wherever your land is, be it in the front yard, backyard, relatives who have land somewhere, because one of the fundamental things that has happened, I submit to both of you, is that we were forced to hate manual labor, to not look at it as something that was important. My grandfather and great-grandfather, I'm a 7th-generation farmer. A husband, the word husband comes from the word husbandry, how you treat your land. So when we begin to act, and I have started a number of young men in the city who are now farmers, master gardeners, etc., that's revolutionary. So when we began to return to our land and value our land, because today many more of our women are doing what? Gardening than men, above ground gardening in the cities. We as men must begin to return to the land, to the soil, and in those natural environments, we engage each other. We engage each other. An example, the brethren over at Friendship West, shout out, Minister Freddie Haynes over there. When we went to the woods, I did several men's retreats over there. Out of that grew the concepts of the Sankofa bird, of the ox. If you go into Friendship West now, you'll see these symbols. But we went away into the woods, and we were able to share this information. And I shared with them a concept that I'll share with you tonight. I said that, particularly as men, we must work at reconstructing our theology so that our Christology is in order, so that our psychology is in order, that we might get our biology in order, so that our sociology would be in order. We're stepping into the season we call Easter. I don't say that. I told them there's no such thing as a pagan cult. But if we're going to talk about the resurrection day, fine. But Easter is not a historical, it's a cultic holiday put around a time that celebrates a white image. We must work to take those images, that image down, and focus on a spiritual image and look at nature as it is supposed to be during this season, and that is the planting of seed and the growing of food.
So as we have about a quarter of an hour left, and there are a couple of things that I would like to pull together as we wrap up the show for tonight. And this has been great conversation. First, I'd like to point institutionalizing nonviolent social change. And I know as a segmentation of that, you talk about the movement, resurrecting a movement in reference to Dr. King, I am a man.
I am a man.
So let's get to the crux of what it is, what our audience needs to know, and what we should expect moving forward.
Men being with men.
In what capacity?
Men, simple, being with men. We do not have relationships. A friend of mine just went on a trip, and she used the word my girlfriends. They get together and they fly away, and they fellowship and they bond. We as men tend to get on the football field, okay, or basketball field to our bonding. Dr. King were he and other men, Dr. Lafayette, James Bevel, C.T. Vivian, uh, Dr. Ralph Abernathy. These were men who spent time like you and I tonight, but not over the media. They got on retreats. They went away into retreats, as I said, with the Friendship West. So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be meeting, getting to know each other, listening to each other, generationally understanding that we have order in society. So this is one of the problems in the 40 Laws of Power, because we now have a generation that doesn't listen to eldership. You see, we're losing that. So as we begin, then if you're 13, 15, that's a child beneath you is 2 years old who's looking up to you. So there's this order of relationship that if the positive energy is not there, then whatever the child sees, the child becomes, if you will.
So if you look at it in men, whether it's by nature the way that we're born or the way that we are groomed, we're very action oriented. We have a tendency to be problem solvers and fixers. And typically, if you're going to get us engaged, we're looking for a specific goal or a specific end game. So if you're talking about men bonding together towards what goal, and if we're looking at this mission, I am a man, resurrecting the movement, related back to Dr. King's principle, what does that look like? Because typically we're going someplace, whether it's playing basketball, whether it's tilling a garden, whether it's going out and putting together an investment fund. What is the end game?
It is creating the world that we then create, and we protect that world. If we say the men, we say we're going to create a garden. We're going to build a garden. Then we build that garden. We protect it. We own it. We embrace it. We are going to build. We're going to repair homes or houses. We're going to train men how to write again, how to use money again. Okay. All those things, as you just said, because we are that way. We are logical, sequential beings.
Correct.
And so, therefore, I have a task at hand, and I want to be able to do that. So, the first thing of it is to invoke the concept of a movement, as I've said on yesterday to several brothers already, and that as we then meet and began to, even if it is the playing the drum, okay, understanding the rhythm patterns of the drum and the importance of frequency and waves and sounds and beats in our behavior, all of that. So what you're just alluding to are those things that that we will be doing. So that I'll put it out there. So those who are interested, certainly you can give me a call at 214-546-3480, 214-546-3480, or email me at Clarence Glover, Glover Jr., Jr. at AOL.com, Clarence Glover Jr. at AOL.com. And from that moment, again, as we said earlier, to begin to meet, and as those who are committed will call or email, and from there we begin to lay out strategies and actions.
So, Tom, do we have the professor's contact information that we can display?
Yes, I am actually putting that together now, so give me just a second, Jimmy.
Okay.
I know that you were on for a couple of minutes, so you may have a couple of questions.
Yeah, thanks to the Biden administration, they're at it again. So, I'm telling you, Tom, this has to be a government entity attacking my system and network to do this. But anyway, I think you may have covered, and I don't know how much I missed in the 20 minutes I was offline. So I apologize if, Professor, if you already covered this.
No problem.
But,
Jimmy, let me do this so I can make sure. Okay. And so, Professor Glover, the 3480 number, and then the Clarence Glover Jr. at AOL email address, correct?
Clarence Glover Jr. at AOL.com.
And then in the 3480 number?
214-546-3480.
Perfect.
Yeah, let's put that up so everyone can get it.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. That's good. So, Professor, in the as you're developing the psyche, I hate to say psyche, as you're helping develop or help clarify a path for men to potentially go on, um, tell us how, if you're getting any resistance, pushback, or is it the message well accepted and embraced? Um, just how fluid is the success and failure rate of what you're doing?
Well, you have to understand, I've been doing this literally all my life,
Yes,
uh,
sir.
working with men. I've worked under my father, my great grandfather, my grandfather, and now I'm in the community. I've been involved in institutionalizing nonviolence, both in the community and in institutions. Uh, in a retired state of life now, I like to say I'm not retired, I'm refired, and I'm very blessed to be able.
Okay.
I'm retired now to have a blessing of my home is paid for, my cars are paid for, all of my basic livings or needs. And I want to say this to men: have a plan in life. What is your plan? So when you get to a certain age, um, um, you can have a life that you can go to a second stage of life, if you will. But yes, there will be resistance, and that's the nature of our society and where we live. But I don't focus on the. I see the resistance on it. Like again, when I ran track, it was a good workout. I love the intellectual, emotional, and even the social conflict. I am a part of the movement. I know my name is logged in to all kind of fellow stuff. So that doesn't phase me. I don't even deal with that. That goes with the turf, you know.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
I hung out with Dr. Lafayette. I hung out with Dr. Ralph Abernathy, James Bevel. I've been with those individuals who are the organizers of the movement, Mrs. King. So that goes with the territory. Now I must engage in the process as an elder now and doing what I can to plant the seeds that I've been blessed to have so that we can have a harvest for the future, you see. And,
And
and
we have
that's
a.
what, and that's what
I'm
I'm
sorry.
committed to.
We have a question on the chat line.
Yes. Miss Armanda Brown, there's a thought and I guess she's asking for
Yes.
your thoughts. It says, it seems when we can be at peace and have community, some say our minds open up. We have earth moving ideas, but if we are too busy, thoughts can't flourish. I'd like to get the professor's thoughts on that.
If I can get what you're saying, but when we are too busy, quote
Is,
unquote, she put it,
is it,
we are too busy.
yeah, our thoughts cannot
I
flourish.
guess busy with
Yes, no, I understand. I
non-productive
understand.
thoughts and
No, I
activities. Yeah.
understand. No,
Okay.
she's put busy in quotes. Uh, so we have to do, we have to be about those things that are essential, that are important. You see, the
Yes, sir.
priorities, and not just be about busy work. You see,
Right.
and be able to prioritize what it is. And let me just break it down in this way. And fundamentally, food is basic.
True.
Food is basic. And we're hearing about all of these things about gardens and so forth. And I believe strongly in that. So a part of this, and I challenge that if we're able to, I have my garden, I have my hens in my backyard, I share crop, I grow food elsewhere. So I challenge all of us this afternoon, evening, as we go into the spring season. One of the greatest things that we could be about is growing food. Period. Knowing if it's nothing but our herbs, if you will,
Hmm.
being able to grow our herbs, spices, uh, those types of things that can power the body, while at the same time we're healing ourselves with the land. Our children are not in the dirt. We're not in the dirt. We're too clean. We need to be around nature. And I find that to be the case by being in Dallas, a much larger urban area than I come from.
Hmm.
But when you don't have African American men who are used to the rural and used to the land, then you don't have that time to create that very serious work of growing foods and doing things that are critical and essential to life itself.
Okay.
What would you say as we close out? We have about 5 minutes, and again, addressing the legacy of Dr. King, his life, his legacy, your extension of his work, and those principles, in addition to your great ideas. So, when we talk about the lasting legacy of Dr. King, what is the most important thing that we need to remember, and more importantly, that we need to be doing and acting? You know, you mentioned a lot of things here today that I think people can activate in their lives. But if we look at that legacy of Dr. King, which is the theme and the subject for tonight's show, what are your thoughts?
Ms. Brown has just put up a question or statement. Okay, so going about things with intention.
Yes.
Yes.
Again, the power word here, intention, not in quotes, intention.
Correct.
being very intentional about our actions and our behaviors.
Correct.
And so, as I brought tonight the intentional effort to speak to our men, I am a man, which after Dr. King's assassination basically went away. We didn't even hear about it anymore. We haven't heard about it. And yet we see in our community the absence of manhood in the positive context. What better way to recognize the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the men and women, particularly the men who worked with him and the women who stood beside him and worked with him and advanced the cause, but particularly the men, than to be intentional about our manhood. And I submit to you tonight that the first thing that a man is to be about provision, protection,
Yes.
intentional. And when we become intentional about provision, meaning food and shelter and protection for ourselves and our families and our communities, then we begin to create that infrastructure, that space and place where we can be, and we protect that space and place where we can be. You see, being very intentional. So I am a man is an intentional step toward creating that environment where we began to plant those seeds in this season.
And upcoming events, Professor, for I Am a Man.
We are, as I said, I just launched it yesterday. I'm taking names of people, men who have called me already. Tonight is a part of that. And we will be meeting at the Martin Luther King Center. That's where we'll be holding the meetings and the sessions at. I've already made contact with them. And since the Dr. King's speech, you can listen to it on your radio, SMU or Dr. King. They had they put the plaque at SMU before McFarland, but they have gifted me the large replica of the plaque, which I'm giving to the King Center, putting at the King Center, and they'll be putting up a permanent exhibit there of me and the work I've done over the last 40 years or so. And it will be entitled Clarence Glover and the Art of Activism.
Okay.
But the King Center will be a place where we'll be meeting, and those who can come, and we become very intentional. And I love the word she's used about our steps and beginning to, as you said, Brother Tommy, identify strategies and things that we can and must do.
Have we determined a day of the week or anything of that
Not
nature?
yet, no, sir, not at this time.
Okay. Good deal.
But we'll be keeping you in contact and those supports. And again, as I've said, I challenge the president. I have lectured all over this country over 40 years. And just as I've learned from Dr. Lafayette, Dr. Vivian, the retreats and the times and spaces and learning about the philosophy of nonviolence, love ethics, nonviolence, social change strategies, how to speak truth to power, all of those things, but at the same time, how to build your own beloved community. We can't really be a part of the larger community until we build our own beloved community.
Correct.
And then we become a part of other communities and the world house.
I will take it to a quote by El Haj Malik El Shabazz. There can be no black-white unity before there is black unity.
Hey,
Correct.
Tom, I'm sorry, Professor. One other thing, someone made a request. Put the professor's contact information in the chat box. So I'm sure people may want to maybe copy it, make it a little easier for them.
And just like you did, Elik El Shabazz, intentional. If we start saying Elik El Shabazz and stop saying Malcolm X, we're dealing with a paradigm shift. Okay. That's important because up to this point, we're being controlled by the media to say Malcolm X rather than Elik El Shabazz, you see.
Okay.
And we create a new language of liberation. And we must have a new language for ourselves, you see, and understand how we use language, how we speak about labor, work, middle class versus the lower class, and how we come together as we're seeing, again, needing to see those relationships, as Dr. West talks about in his books. Those of us in the middle class who have been with those who they gave birth to gangster rap and the music in the Bronx and fight the powers, and why were they fighting powers, and why weren't the middle class there at the time? And just today, how look at the students who are stepping out of high schools today and protesting across the nation on gun violence with weapons that are meant for war and war alone. Where will we be when we're in a new space right now as we speak, even tonight, on the cusp of a new beginning?
All
Well,
right,
Tom, as
Jimmy.
we get ready to close the show out, let's talk about next week what the theme will be, so our listeners and watchers can have something to anticipate with some intention for coming back next week to watch the show.
That's right, the
Yeah,
intention.
we will have one of our special guests who is also a returning guest as well. He was on one of our panel discussions. We'll have Mr. Anton Lucky, who will be talking about Black America, mass incarceration. This brother has done a lot of work over the years. For those of you who may know Pastor Omar, who has worked, for years and years. We lost him a couple of years ago, and Anton Lucky has taken the leadership of the organization that he launched. And he has now worked with brothers to change lives, especially those, of course, who have been incarcerated. So we're going to talk about the demographics, the statistics, and how we go back and rebuild and help these brothers, who are a part of our community and who are a part of our lives. Many of them are part of our families as well. So we're looking
Sure.
forward to the interesting show next week.
Right. And definitely have to be there for I Am a Man. So whenever you get the meeting scheduled, let us know, because I
We
want to
will
be there
certainly.
myself.
We certainly. Also, someone asked about Dr. King's speech. If you could put it up, they can go to Martin Luther King SMU and they will find his speech. Martin Luther King
Okay.
SMU. They can also Google Dr. Martin Luther King and Ghana, the birth of a new nation. Dr.
Okay.
King and Ghana, the birth of a new nation. And yes, I hope to be able to come back again. Thank you so much, Ms. Brown.
No, you can come back anytime you like, Professor.
You.
You have an open invitation,
Oh,
and
yes, and by the way, I mentioned the documentary In Remembrance of Martin. Please call PBS to order your copy of the documentary. You can call PBS at 1-800-344-3337, 1-800-344-3337. Just call it PBS. And for your personal use, for your home, for your church, for your organization, this is the documentary we did in 1986, In Remembrance of Martin, the first National King holiday. Great documentary of the event itself. Those 2 weeks I was there with Mrs. King and others, as well as vintage footage from Dr. King's life right up until his assassination.
All right.
Okay.
Well, Jimmy, we are out of time. We want to thank you again, Professor Glover, for your time, your energy, your ministry, and your mission. And of course, we will have you back again. We want to thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you
Yes,
so very
thank
much.
you very much.
Continue your great work.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.